I think Julie screwed it up.
Yeah.
Blame Charles.
It's my fault.
Yeah,
Buck stops here.
Normally you have to be on the main screen with no presentation.
just escape out of it.
Put my phone on silence.
Yeah, all right. Phone.
Do you want me to minimize
Minimize
this?
this, yep.
Okay, sound off.
Minimize this.
Well, I don't want to minimize all the presentations.
Anybody else have an idea? This is what
Here.
Sophia says.
May I?
Yes.
I have a handout.
So the issue here, we have,
So you just want to
I'll do it
extend,
for
right?
something substantial.
you know, we wanna,
Like a $100 bill.
Oh, okay. I have 2 kids under 15.
Yeah.
Double jeopardy. Yeah,
You get it, Sophia?
we could.
LDO, that one. Yep. Okay,
All right. Thank you.
all right, let's try this again. I guess we're ready to roll. I've got 7 slides here. I was originally intending on having 3, so we're gonna roll pretty quickly. For those who don't know the LDO, our association was started in 1985. It was started due to low water. If anybody knows the history, for quite a few years, they were pumping water into Olson, trying to bring the lake levels up. The Valley Branch Watershed District created the 1007 project, which brought the levels up and stabilized that. In 2009, Eurasian water milfoil was detected in the lake, and things got pretty bad by about 2014. You can see the photo, that's from the DNR. Problem was, nobody really knew how to treat it very well, and nobody had funding sources to pay for these things. So it didn't, there was a small treatment in 14, but we didn't really start moving on this stuff until about 16. Now, in 22 and 23, we did a fluoridone treatment. For those of you not familiar, that's a whole basin, so the entire lake, and it is targeted at Eurasian milfoil, and it also takes out curly-leaf pondweed. Very good treatment. It was very successful. It's very expensive, and we still have some issues with it, which I'll talk about. One other thing for everybody to understand, you can almost eradicate, not completely, but almost eradicate Eurasian water milfoil. Curly-leaf pondweed is almost impossible until somebody comes out with some new tools for us to utilize. That plant buries turons into the sediment, which are not touched by herbicides, so it will keep coming up. So until we get something that stops turon growth, that's going to be an ongoing expense for any body of water that has curly leaf in it. So what is our focus right now? It's management. So we run a shoreline program. All of our residents that treat their properties for invasive and non-invasive weeds, plants, they run through us. We do this so we can manage the herbicide that's in the lake. We also do it because we can offer a greater discount because we're doing a lot of the administrative work that the applicator would have to do. But as an organization, we do that and it reduces the price for the residents. The other thing we do is the AIS control. We also do lake health monitoring. So one of the folks is here, Tom, who goes out and takes samples for the Met Council, and the Met Council will process those and check for heavy metal concentration and various, algae concentration and so forth. And you can go out to the Met Council's website and see that info. We also do a lake cleanup day, and we're trying to get into more education and prevention. So if you, on the right, you'll see a picture of before and after. This was a few years ago when we treated, or actually about 2 weeks before is up above and after is down below. But more importantly is to give you an idea of what we're spending on these lakes, okay? This is why we created a 501c3, so that we could generate a funding source. We're not coming here and asking for the city or anybody to take over the total expense. I guess, the charter of this particular session was about grants, but as you can see, we spend a lot more than what's being talked about here. So what's up next for us? Curlew management. We did detect that even after our fluoridone treatment, we have some ureas and milfoil. I'll be out surveying the lake tomorrow, submitting the survey to the treater and to the DNR, and we'll be spending probably another $5,000. Shoreline buffer restoration. It's a big push by the Washington Conservation District. It's a big push by us. Everything is a cause and effect. So if we remove all these invasive species, something's got to take up the nutrients that is entering the lakes. Hopefully it's natives until they reach a nuisance level because we have too many nutrients in the lakes. And this is what we're starting to experience now with this macro algae. If you look at that lower picture, these are big balls of really like gritty, grainy algae. And it's a native. So we can't get rid of that. The only way we can get rid of it is to reduce what's going into our lakes. And a big part of that is education. And of course I have recruit board members and resident participation. As you know, with any volunteer organization, that's always a challenge. Our what if we get zebra mussels? What if we get starry stonewort? I mean, it doesn't get any worse than starry stonewort. What if we don't have people to backfill the current board members? I'm stepping down from being the president next year. We have a new president, so I am able to step down. I think I've brought up to the city council before the idea of a lake improvement district. I still feel very strongly that the city should look into that and consider having one source of management for the lakes underneath your control. And then I'll just end with saying that AIS is very expensive, and we support the ramp monitoring program through the Washington Conservation District with the same level of funding that the Valley Branch supports it. So we double our coverage to try and do prevention. And that's one of the ramp monitors. She let me take her picture the other day. And that's what I have. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you want to do questions afterwards, after the other lakes present.
Yeah, we can do questions now, Link. I saw you had bar. Is that because they support the Valley Branch Watershed District?
It is, and I should also have freshwater science on here. I've been authorized by the DNR to do our lake surveys, so that saves us $5,000 a year because it's $2,500 per lake to survey. But now as we get into curly leaf pondweed, I'm not really qualified for that. So now we have to pay somebody to survey.
Okay.
Tomorrow I'm going to go out and do a survey for ureas and milfoil, so we won't have a fee. But the curly will have to do. Bar is on there primarily because of the Valley Branch. Maycirc is on there because we've done a lot of work with the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center, also with the genetics lab in Montana and some others to make sure, like before we put fluoridone in our lake, we sent 64 samples of milfoil to the lab in Montana, which is the only lab for doing genetics on Eurasian milfoil. Had it tested to make sure that we did not have a strain that was resistant, So we wouldn't lose money by just putting herbicide into a lake that wouldn't do anything.
Of these other that you listed, the DNR, city, Washington County, what kind of funding do you get from these other groups to help out with some of this?
So Washington
Abatement.
County has a grant program. It varies per year. And really their funding comes from the DNR.
Okay,
The DNR also has funding, which they've had for the last 2 years, but it's not an every year thing. It depends on how much is moved over their budget, which is basically done through lobbying, and Minnesota Lakes and Rivers does most of that lobbying. So if you get money, let's say we got money this year, which we did not, we would be in a better position next year. And this whole process has really changed over the last 5 to 8 years. It has now become a much fairer program. It used to be you were only considered for a grant if you got your submission in first. So at 12 a.m., everybody's trying to submit, and their systems are becoming overloaded, and maybe you made it, maybe you didn't. And then there's only so much money. When they get to that point, then they're done.
so there's no scoring criteria.
So now the process, it does have more of a scoring. First, it's targeting what they consider to be the most invasives. So if you have starry stonewort, you are probably gonna be higher up in the pecking order than somebody who has an AIS problem that is, we'll say more of a reoccurring, so like curly leaf, where you know you're not gonna get rid of it, and it's gonna be a continued expense. So they'd rather target something that is as bad as it can be first. And then there's other criteria, like, you know, we did receive some money the year that we did fluoridone treatments, which was fabulous, because that was a big, big expense for us. But that pretty much put us out of the running then for the next couple of years. And it's by lake ID. So, you know, we can file for Olson, we can file for De Montreville. There's been some years where we've gotten for one lake and not another.
Okay. Any other questions for Link?
Yeah, it was just two questions. So the first one, just more of like a technical question. When you were talking about the nutrients, the excess nutrients, what is it that's elevating that so high? If you could speak to that a little bit, I guess I'm just not sure.
First off, I'll tell you it's controversial,
Okay.
but I'll give you some opinions. Educated opinions and things that have come out of Minnesota Lakes and Rivers research. First off, we do know that all the lakes are getting more boating activity than they were 10 years ago. So we know boating activity has increased. Boats are bigger. There's different style boats. So ones that have more thrust, ones that put out more wake. So we have that, because when you bring the sediment up into the water column, that takes nutrients that were locked down and it throws them up there. And then we have algae growth and plant growth, things that we don't want. The other thing that we have is, according to the DNR, every 100 feet of shoreline that is grass to the water contributes 200 pounds of algae to the lake per year. If you have a shoreline buffer, you contribute, as they say, like somewhere between 5 and 20 pounds. Okay, so the educational process about having a natural waterfront instead of something that looks like it should be on a golf course is part of a process where it's going to be an ongoing thing, especially for new homeowners who maybe want to come and have a great big grass section for the kids down to a beach. You know, if we have a buffer, you know, that's another part. Another part that we see specifically on De Montreville is the road construction that was done around the lake wasn't done properly for drainage. And what we're seeing is, instead of the runoff going into a sediment pond and then into the lake, we see it building up on the street and then washing directly into the lake. So you can take all these things, and I don't think you can point at one thing. You can't point at boats or, you know, or any specific thing. That's all we can do is address what we can.
Perfect. That's helpful, thank you. And then the second question, I guess, kind of following up with Mayor's questions about some of the funding sources. So with the numbers that you had thrown up there on annual amount of money that you spent on it, I guess, how much of that funding has come from grants versus self-funded from lake homes? If you can just kind of help me understand that breakdown a little bit.
Well, if we just pick a year, we'll pick like an average year. Let's say 2018. We probably received 5,000 from the city of Lake Elmo. We may or may not have received any money from Washington County, because it used to be, we were pretty much guaranteed, but more lakes are infected and there's only a certain pool of money. So I'm gonna say if we got anything from Washington County in 2018, it was probably 2,000 to 3,000. And I don't think we received anything from the DNR. So the rest was funded by the LDO.
And that's pretty common.
Pretty common, you know, the year that we did Floridone, we were really lucky and we received a grant from the DNR for 10,000 for each lake.
Okay.
Okay, that was like unheard of. And maybe they felt bad, or, you know, maybe I begged enough, I don't know, but prior to that, it was, from the DNR, it was amounts like, 500. You know, not 5,000, 500. So, you know, the percentage of what's coming in from grants versus self-funded is probably 20% or less most of the time.
Perfect, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thanks,
All
Lynn.
right, thank you. All right, I'll let you find it.
Can I make one comment, please?
We're gonna let the speakers go, and then if you have something to say, you can do that at that time, okay, sir?
Hi, Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Liz Niehaus, and I'm been the secretary for Lake Elmo Lake Association since we became association. I just can't get off that board like you guys do. Once you say yes, you're there for life, it appears.
I'm Wendy Griffin. I am the president of the Lake Elmo Lake Association, and I have lived on that shore my entire life. And I can tell you some pretty interesting things about that lake within the last couple of years.
So a little bit about the Lake Elmo Lake itself. We have one public access point, and that's through the Lake Elmo Regional Park. And so with that, we see about an average of 10 to 20 additional boats on the lake almost per day. Fishermen, you know, just actual water activities themselves. And with that, of course, can be additional spreading of any invasive species carried from one lake to another, from one boat to another lake, that kinds of stuff. Along with milfoil just breaks off and replants itself anyway. So you're constantly trying to manage that, knowing that it's going to replant itself and become even stronger in some areas. So eradication is hard. You know, you're lucky if you can get areas really as clean, but you need maintenance, ongoing maintenance, to try to stay on top of that. And that's kind of where we've been trying to go these last couple of years.
We had the opportunity to get money from the DNR in 2015. We found out in 2005 that milfoil had been found on the north end of the lake. We had the opportunity, we had divers come in and hand pull the milfoil in small areas. We noticed on the north end of the lake that the milfoil had pretty much closed the whole entire north end of the lake off, but it's also shallower there. The unique thing about Lake Elmo Lake is the depth. It's 140 feet deep. It drops off fairly quickly when you move out from your shoreline. We have milfoil that can grow up to 25 feet because of the water quality. We also, Link was mentioning about sending milfoil off and getting it test out to see what it is. We have found in the past that the Eurasian milfoil has also crossbred with the native milfoil. So again, there's another challenge that presents itself. We did, in the beginning, we did harvesting. We had a harvester come in to harvest the milfoil. They collected the biomass. We did that because we wanted to get the biomass out of the water to keep the water quality. We have people that come and fish on the lake until noon or later in the day, but fishermen are there in the morning. And from noon on, it's wide open for boats to recreate and do as they wish. Again, knowing that the milfoil breaks off, it ends up reseeding itself. They also found that the biggest spread of milfoil are fishermen, because they get on a lake, they'll go and fish. If they don't get anything, they'll get off the lake and they'll go. And because of the location of Lake Elmo, DeMontreville, Olson, and Jane, it's pretty easy to get that milfoil to move from one lake to the next. Lake Elmo is also a spring-fed lake, which keeps the temperature at a different level than it does. And because it is deep, there is the thermocline that comes in where I'm not real sure how deep your lakes are.
Well, Jane is about halfway, and then
Yeah.
and DeMontville and Olson are both very shallow.
Yeah, I remember monitoring, and I don't remember the
80 and 100% of the total for our
Right.
lakes. So,
Yeah, yeah.
So these lakes are, each one of these lakes require a very different approach for
Yes.
management.
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn. We have members that join our lake association, and they have been more than willing to, we have a $75 membership fee, but we get more money in because they are more than willing to donate to help for the cause of the milfoil. We also have curly pond leaf, and haven't started with that. We also have narrow cattails, which is another invasive, which we haven't even looked at because we're working on trying to get the milfoil down to a manageable level so that we can just spot spray it. Back talking about bar engineering, Meg Ratty from Bar Engineering, I think it was in 2015, did a presentation saying that for us to treat the lake, to treat Lake Elmo, would be $17,000 to treat it, which was expensive in 2015. We decided against that because we would be treating a great deal of water that didn't have the milfoil. So we just couldn't see spending that kind of money treating water that didn't have milfoil. So we went back to the harvesting of milfoil, and then now we do treat it chemically because they added a surfactant to the chemical which will make it adhere to the milfoil instead of just treating the entire water. Hopefully we can get it to adhere to where the milfoil is. Did I go too far here?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's all right. We have approximately 56 lakeshore owners on Lake Elmo Lake. And so right now we have approximately 96% of them are members of the Lake Association. So we've gotten some great commitment from everyone to try to help manage what the lake does. About 6,000 feet of the lake is the regional park, and Washington County has never joined us as being a member. So that's always a challenge because we're really treating half of the lake, for somebody.
Have you asked them to join?
Oh, yeah.
And can you
They
share?
don't have the money.
They don't have the money.
Because the park is run off of what people spend on their park passes to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So they just don't have any extra money. The park did let us put our biomass on their property. But, and we were thankful for that, so we didn't have
Sure.
to find a place to put it. But yeah, that's it. I mean, and that's what we hear every time we go to ask for money. We ask for them to increase their fees for people to come into the park, which they did, but that went into administration. We were thinking it would be a good idea if we could get $1 or $2 here
Sure.
to help with that, but that went back into administration. So yeah, that's what I hear all the time is that their funding comes from the people that use the parks, and they
Okay.
have a number of parks.
Yeah, right, okay, thank you for that explanation.
So funding, we've had, Minnesota DNR has been funding us small grants, very small grants, since 2015. This is our first year that we will not receive DNR funding. Washington County, we've received since 2016, and we will get funding this year for that as well. Lake Elmo JCs have been supportive, Lake Elmo Rotary Club, the city of Lake Elmo, and we're hoping for 2024. And then our own fundraisers and our own memberships. Councilmember Hearn, you asked the question about how many, what's the percentage type of thing. You know, it's us, you know. It's very little funding from the DNR, the city, all that, when you put into play how much it costs to actually do this work.
And we learn something new every year.
Yes.
I'm sure. Any questions for the Lake Elmo Lake Association representatives?
Any questions? I can tell you that the ice came on in January, was off in March. That was the first. I can tell you the temperature of the water on Christmas Eve day was 41 degrees. I can tell you until today, the lake was absolutely horrid with the algae, with what was going on. I mean, this is a very atypical year for the water. And I don't know what you guys have been finding over there, but yeah, it was atrocious as to what we were seeing. And I don't know if it was because the lake hadn't turned completely over, if the lake has turned completely over now. I don't have any of those answers, but I'm still searching. So, and
Okay.
thank you very much for your time.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Nope,
Oh, boy, thanks.
yeah. And Lake Jane?
Hi, my name is Leanne Leach, and I have lived on Lake Jane for 34 years, so I think you said your whole life, so maybe just a couple more years.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've had
I got
me.
you by about
Yeah, yeah. And from our entire association, a big thank you, because like you've heard from the other associations, the money is so critical to us. And your support is really helpful in keeping this lake for us, for future generations, and for all the citizens that come out and use it. You know, it's not just us lake owners, it's all the citizens come and use the lakes. So we do appreciate it very much. We want to keep that beautiful natural resource useful. I'll try not to go over some of the same things that the other associations did. We kind of had a informal organization before 2014. It was mostly associated with shoreline management. We really didn't have weed issues before then. So there wasn't a lot for an association to do. In 2017, I think it was, they did a study, Valley Branch Watershed, and found that we only had 2% milfoil. So at that time, they said it's really not an issue. But as you've heard, 2% becomes 50% very, very quickly. So from 2017 till now, it's been a huge issue. For many years, DNR only supported that 15% of the littoral area, which is just the surrounding shoreline. So we weren't able to treat a lot. They just wouldn't let us. They said it wasn't bad enough. In 2018, it became so bad, I know I couldn't get our pontoon out. And that's when I said, something's got to change here. It's time to get this organization going, and we formed Lake Jane Association a little bit more formally and got an actual board together and meetings. Again, as you've heard from the others, we every year ask for help from you guys from Washington County and DNR, which, you know, you heard is not much. Our money comes from pretty much our lake owners. And I know I personally went door to door begging because we had no money when we first started out. And we knew we had to do something. So we all had to pony up and take care of it. And since then, we've been working more closely with Bar Engineering and the DNR. And by working closely with the DNR, they kind of agreed to do a study for us. And we used this new chemical called Procelacor. It was brand new. They said this was going to be the ticket. Very expensive. It's not a whole lake treatment. It was for areas. So we do delineations, find out where it was the worst, and treat those areas. It was a 3-year plan. And we felt after 3 years, you never totally get rid of it, but it would be under control. So we embarked on this path, hand in hand with the DNR, thinking this was the ticket. It wasn't. And so after a lot of expense and a lot of work, we just realized this isn't the answer. But the DNR was not letting us do anything else. This was more of a spot treatment or an area treatment. Finally, when they realized that, you know, we've been working closely with this lake association and this was our recommendation, it really hasn't worked, we're gonna give them their whole lake treatment. So following the learnings from Link's organization with the Floridone, which is the whole lake treatment, we decided to go down that path. Unbeknownst to us, we didn't have money. So we lost a whole year because we just didn't have money to do it. So we were just doing other treatments like temporaries to get us through. Of course, when you do something like that, the next year it's really bad. So we did a whole lake treatment of Floridone last year. Well, you guys know what the winter was like? Floridone is not as effective when the lake is open. You know, the lake never fully closed. So the sunlight was there, letting the milfoil grow. The Floridone was not as effective. This year, it's probably the worst it's ever been. So we're continuing to treat with the Floridone. Yes, it's expensive, but we don't really know what other options we have. We're hopeful that it will be the answer, but we're just continuing to work with DNR and our treaters to find the solution.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
I don't have any questions. Anybody else? No,
It's a lot of work.
I don't think there's
Okay.
any questions. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you again for all your support.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sir, you wanted to speak to the council. You'll need to come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
I just wanted to make one quick comment. I'm Jerry Gracke, and I'm on the LDO board. When we mentioned, or when Link mentioned that we got lucky and got $10,000 a year for those, for the 2 lakes, each lake, I saw a lot of wow. But if you looked up there, those 2 lakes cost us about $100,000 to do that whole lake treatment. So
Yep.
the 10,000 was nice, but it was a long way from the 2 and the 5 that we get. I just wanted to bring that up because it's very expensive.
More like 111,000, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. I stand corrected. Okay, that's all I had. I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Yes,
Can I make one more comment?
sure. Please come to the podium.
So, what we have here is, 3 different bodies of water that are very different from each other. They require different management, or 4 different bodies of water that have, they require different management techniques. They require a lot of effort from the associations. There's only a few of us for each association that are trying to manage this. At some point, I would really like to, besides funding, I would like to ask the council, mayor, to please give some thought to either a lake improvement district or a centralized meeting plan to bring people together and try and talk about how we manage these resources beyond the lake associations. Because like what was said before, you know, yes, the people on the lakes use these, but I can go over to our boat ramp and see that that launch parking lot is full, probably 70–80% of the time. So those are people, maybe they're from Lake Elmo, maybe they're not, but those are outside resources that are using these bodies of water for recreation. And besides the funding source, it would just be nice to have more of a centralized thought process, or at least, you know, brainstorming process to get together and think about how we manage these resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So from that, we're supposed to discuss what to go into the 2025 budget, right?
Yes, one of the thought recommendations in talking to the associations, we have 4 main lakes and we have 3 associations. One of the things we may want to consider is adding $5,000 to the grant process, so we have $5,000 for each lake. And as Link said, they're individual and each needs special treatment. So that's something I would recommend at least for your 2025 budget cycle.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, these lakes are, from my perspective, a real jewel for the whole city of Lake Elmo and the surrounding area. I think they're critical to not only the people that live on them and enjoy them. I don't spend a lot of time on them, but I like seeing open water. It's nice, and I know a lot of people come in to go fish or recreate. I would like to maybe make a push for, instead of just the Lake Elmo Lake Association, have the city request that the Lake Elmo Park Reserve, since they do have, I mean, they add a lot of boats per year from their launch to help manage some of that lake, since they're the primary recipient of that use. I think it's at least worth the ask on the city's part. I'd like us to think about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that just seems logical to me, but I do see that. I read up a little bit. I had the good fortune to spend some time with Link a couple years ago and learned about the littoral area, and those lakes are very shallow, and they're suspect to much more of the damage from large motors and these some of the wakeboards that use water as ballast and disturbing the what do you call it, the sand areas or the mucky bottoms or whatever brings it up, right? So from my standpoint, I mean, if we can figure it out with Clarissa, when we look at the budgets, if it's something that we can do to add Lake Olson in there as well as the other 3, I would be for that. But I would like for us to take a look at the budgets that we have.
Yeah,
and
we can tentatively put that in there. Your first real budget workshop we're going to be discussing will be on August 28th, if I remember correctly. I think that's the right date. We're going to be looking at the budget. So we can tentatively put that in there, and if we run into problems, council can certainly remove it, or if there's not consensus, if they don't feel it's a worthy cause.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
I would agree with that. I think it's important to support as much as we can the lakes. So I think when the grant requests have come before us in the past, I've certainly supported those. It's unfortunate that I guess we don't get a greater amount of support from the state and the DNR for this, and it's really on the backs of our residents. But certainly support the grant and adding that to the budget as we have in past years, and adding in the 4th lake. I also wonder if, and I'm not sure if it's the right group or not, but if the Parks Commission or if it's our Planning Commission, to look at what would it take to have a lake improvement district. I don't know anything about that. I think it's worth at least exploring to see what it would look like. Or at the very least, I think pulling the associations together for some discussions. And I was curious as you were each talking how connected you are between your associations and your learnings and your approaches you're taking. And so if there's something that the city can do to help facilitate that, I think we should for the greater good of the city. So again, I'm not sure which group that would be in the city, but I certainly would support that.
Anyone else? Councilmember Holtz?
I would echo both those comments, not only to make sure it's a grant per lake, because they are independent watersheds. I think we can have an honest and genuine conversation of maybe it's 6,000, maybe it's 7,000. It's not 50, obviously, but can we add a bit more flexibility, seeing as the grant has not changed since its inception, at least from what we've been told tonight. I would also agree with Councilmember Beckstrom. I would be curious to know more about the lake improvement districts. We have our yearly work plan, but things come up and there are opportunities to obviously serve the public. And I at least would want to know more what that looks like. Are there examples from other nearby cities where this has been in place? How long has it been in place? What does that structurally look like? Because obviously any new change takes time to walk through and to establish it. But if the wheel has already been created by someone else, what can we learn from that? What are some of those best practices? I think that would be a great topic for a workshop that we probably already have filled for the next 4 or 5 workshops. But to me, it's a worthwhile thing. We value our environment in this city, so to me, we should have that conversation.
All right, yes, Councilmember Dragisich.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Councilor Holtz said. I know we haven't even got into our budget yet, but I would hope as we got into it, we'd look at perhaps increasing that somewhat, since it's been like 5,000 for a long time. We don't know what we're gonna face as we start getting into and other challenges, so it would have to be weighed against, all of the needs of the city, but it seemed like perhaps a bit more would be helpful. And the lakes are really important to the residents.
Well, residents and, the overall lake, and it brings people into our city, and hopefully they're respectful. I'm sure that's not 100% the case, but yeah. All right, I think we've got some direction on that, right?
Yep,
We're
I'm good.
Thank you all very much for your time and coming to talk to us tonight. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the work that you guys do to help keep the lakes healthy and clean, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
All right, so next on the docket, we have open space PUD review. I know we did a little bit of this a while ago, and we asked Director Stopa to come back and give us some more thoughts on this. Oh, we're gonna hang on just till we get that door shut.
So I'll go ahead and run through the presentation one more time, made some edits to it, obviously, and then talk about the main thing that came out last time with the cluster developments. But as we know, it's rural zone, 20-acre minimum, 50% open space. There's buffers along the lot lines. Lots are between a half acre to an acre. It's mostly single family. It's on septic, individual or communal. And the density currently is at 0.5 units per acre. That's designed for acre lots at a 50% open space. And half acre lots currently could be developed and are developed in these plan unit developments, and they could be built out to a 0.87 with 50% open maximum. You can see that we have 18 existing OPPUDs. Most of them are over 100 feet in width. It kind of gives you a breakdown of their size, depth. This is a typical open space plan unit development, the Fields of St. Croix. Their average width is 120, and typical depth is 300 feet with nearly a acre lot size average.
Is that permanent farmland factored into their open space percentage? I'm assuming it is.
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
This shows, this is a map of possible open space PUDs with zoning, so these are sites over 20 acres, rural residential, and then agricultural. So I wanted to bring up in just the cluster developments, because really, the comments made me think of a few things. Councilmember Beckstrom brought up some really good comments about how this is gonna look if we allow this any different than a traditional development, standard suburban development. So I thought that if the council would want to move forward with this, I would recommend looking at design standards and trying to promote traditional development. And then another comment that came up was like, can we locate them in a certain area? And we looked at the map and thought they should be located, if you wanted to put them in a certain area, south of Union Pacific Railroad. There are over 15 sites that could be built. Some of the development standards would be higher roof pitches, higher ceiling heights with appropriate window and door header heights, promote front porches. A big piece of this would be requiring side or rear loaded garages. Also, districts sometimes prohibit certain materials like vinyl siding, for example, could be prohibited. And then it would go through a design review process. So we would treat it similar to the old village and go through each housing, each product, each house that is built, and put them through a design review. So that's something to consider. If this seems like this is too much too soon, my recommendation would be, let's just move with some of the other recommendations that we're looking at with buffers and lot sizes. But this is something to consider and definitely talk about. But I do want to run through the rest of the presentation just to kind of talk about some of the main issues. And that's density, open space, lot sizes, buffers, street width, trail sidewalks, and impervious surface. So as you can see, 1 acre at 50%, 0.45, 0.43 is what you could build. Half acre, 0.87. We had talked about going to 60% open space. I think the recommendation is that if we don't go forward with cluster, just leave it at 50%. I think it simplifies the process, but still leave the density at 0.8 is a recommendation. Currently, the buffers are confusing to follow, so we're looking at a simplification and then potentially reducing the buffers. So the proposed buffer would be 100% along all adjacent property lines and a 200-foot buffer from all existing residential dwellings within an abutting residential development. What that means is if there's a farmhouse adjacent to this development, it would have to be 200 feet from that farmhouse. And the buffers cannot be part of a buildable lot. That is unclear in the current code. So the idea is those buffers could not be counted towards the lot size, which is what we're promoting is a 100 by 160 minimum. Street sidewalks, impervious, trails and impervious surface. So the 20-foot street is preferred from developers that we're hearing. Concrete curb and gutter is something we're going to continue to require. We would like to. The code promotes sidewalks and trails. So currently it promotes a sidewalk on one side and a trail typically on the other side. It requires that the trail be the distance of the center line of all roads. So it doesn't necessarily require that the trail go the entire length of the housing development. It could go behind the houses, but as long as they have, let's say, 5,000 linear feet, they have to satisfy that. 25% maximum impervious coverage per lot. Currently, the code reads per development. It's very difficult to track and then assigning the coverage to each person. So by default, we've been using the 25%. I think that was a good way of moving forward too in the future. So that's what we're looking at. We did some code rewrites and some edits from the last meeting. That was submitted in your packet too. So really, any questions that you have, if you want to talk about the cluster developments, if you think that moving towards design standards and allowing clusters, really any questions that you could have.
Councilmember Holt.
Is it fair to say with the buffer aspect, some of the language you're proposing, that actually some of the ones we currently have align with what the proposed is based upon, we know, you had that chart of all the developments that have been there, that there is variation right now as it is, and because it wasn't necessarily clear on some of those ones what that rule was.
Exactly. There may not actually be a conservation easement type buffer between the lot and the property boundary of the planned unit development. It's just the lot may be 400, 500 feet deep, and there may be 200 feet of wooded area or trees.
Thank you.
I guess one thing that struck me a little bit was, I liked most of it. I know that for a lot of people, and even myself, you start talking about cluster developments, it's kind of like, well, it's just different for people that have been in the community a long time. I like the idea of maybe keeping it in a zone south of the railroad tracks. The one thing I personally, my opinion is to stay away from dictating some of the design elements, let the developer, HOA, or whoever has that do that. I'm not a big guy on the government saying you can't use vinyl siding or you have to have it look this way. We have some general, I know that in our code, don't we have some general design guidelines, which I always thought was kind of funny because everybody has their own view of what looks nice and what doesn't. So that's the only thing I would try to stay away. Keep things that are needed as foundation for the city to operate functionally, whether it's, safety requirement, width of street, maintenance stuff. I think we want to maintain that trail connectivity piece when developments come in to make sure that we're trying to tie all those together. Those types of things that are functory for the city itself. But some of the other stuff, I hesitate to get government involved in that.
Okay.
Councilmember Hearn.
I agree with the design standard. I'd prefer to stay away from that. Outside of that, I guess there was just like a couple of things that stood out to me that maybe just would be like concerns or things that I think would maybe be good for us to discuss. And one of the questions was actually, you had mentioned that trails would be considered part of the open space, and then there was a lot of conversation about sidewalks possibly being encouraged as well. Would that be considered part of the open space area as well, or would that not be included in that calculation?
The trails that go into the open space, that would still be considered open space, but not the right-of-way.
Okay,
For the
oh,
road
sure,
right-of-way.
sidewalk,
Right.
okay, great, and then,
And we also encourage like old farm buildings, barns.
yep,
We wouldn't discount that. We would just consider that open space too, so we
space.
preserve, yeah.
all right, and then just, I guess, one of the things that just kind of, I noticed was when you were talking about the density bonus, where there's a little bit of vague language with, it could be a 10% density bonus with considerable wetlands or natural area, or sorry, 10% density bonus with considerable wetlands or natural area or stormwater reuse for irrigation. I guess my thought on that is, it's a little bit vague, and I know vague can sometimes be good. I just would love to maybe make more of that incentive specifically for the stormwater reuse, where, maybe it's more of a 8%, 2%, where we're just trying to load a little bit more of the incentive towards what might help Lake Elmo with the water a little bit more.
Can we make the water reuse mandatory?
I was about to say I would have,
You want to make it mandatory for the percentage increase?
just for the open space PUD.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes, if we're digging into this overall area, let's make a requirement.
Okay.
My 2 cents.
I just want to bring up too, since this is a plan unit development, the idea of the 10% bonus density is to guide the developer to say like, oh, I can get 10% if I do these things. It's
Right.
up to the council, they can make a decision
Right.
through that process, just so you know.
And they seem to like to try to go for those incentives, so I feel like if we can make it a win-win, it'd be ideal.
I just don't like it. I don't like bonus density. I don't. I'd rather that was completely out of here, because,
So
I just don't think we should have it in our PUDs that if you jump through these hoops, we'll give you more housing, beyond what we've said we would allow, so.
So one challenge, I agree, like bonus density
Yeah.
is not, it can be challenging. We have two standards though, it's buildable area, right? So you have someone who has a really nice piece of property with wetlands is being penalized for having this, like in terms of their density and the units they can build, if they can meet the standards for lot sizes. And we have someone going through that process right now. So we were looking at it and thinking like, well, if they have certain, slopes, wetlands, they could receive a bonus density and just kind of give them support from the council to say, okay, we understand that you have challenges with your site. Well, we're okay with the density, and that way, because when they're submitting their concept plans and everything, they're spending a lot of money, and it's kind of like giving them guidance to say that, potentially you could receive this bonus density.
So maybe that would be where if it was just a little less vague on, because I agree with you as well that I don't really like bonus density. Now, yeah, I mean, maybe it's just unfortunate for the landowner if that's the case, but.
One suggestion I would make, instead of using buildable area, we could use, the gross acreage calculation. And then from there, you could say the stormwater reuse, if you want to require it, can be required.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking regardless of bonus density.
Yeah.
If you do an open space PUD, you're, no matter what, doing this, regardless of density levels.
So that could be a path forward, so that way that person would get, the density as if it was, 100% buildable, and they just have to figure out how to meet the standards at 0.8.
I just don't want bonus density. I just don't think it's the right thing to do, and I never have. I never understood that, but I know that's not consistent with how we've done other things, but, and I also don't think that we should be creating a plan here in a way that we're trying to get a developer to be able to develop a piece of property. We should be creating what we want and what we need as a community for standards going forward, and not trying to work this whatever direction we can so a developer can develop the lot that he bought. I just don't think that's the right approach.
I guess from my standpoint, I think there are times when it benefits the city and the developer can do it. They normally wouldn't have to do it, but if they do it and it benefits the city, I think that's the basis of what a density bonus is based on, right? So then the council can still make the determination if that considered flexibility, or that, let's say they took all their parking and had it underground, and had underground parking for visitors, right, additional. Well, that's above and beyond what the benefit would. Maybe we would find that as keeping, a larger impervious piece up on top. Maybe that's something we would look at. So from that standpoint, I don't know that I want to really limit some of our tools in the toolbox, not that they always get used, right? I have a hammer in my toolbox, but sometimes I need the screwdriver. And so I guess having some of those available, to me, I see as a benefit for the city as well, not just the developer. But I do agree, sometimes it gets to be like, well, is that really a benefit for the city?
That's exactly it,
And that's what we need to determine, like sometimes when there's an open space, well, it's gonna have to be an open space because it's not buildable. I don't know that that's necessarily a benefit to the city at that point. They're not adding any additional value. But there are things that they can bring additional value, whether it's connecting a trail or putting in some amenities that the city finds appropriate. So from that vein, I think having that in there can be advantageous. Yes, Councilmember Dragisich.
I agree with you, Mayor, in that context. I think you have to look and say, what is the benefit to the city of giving the bonus, and not necessarily the development, the betterment to the developer? What do the citizens get from granting this extra density that's worth the trade-off? So we all walk out win-win, but I think we need to weigh it carefully and evaluate what is our benefit in this, so we end up with the kind of community that we want, as you speak quite a bit about.
Yeah, that's really it, and I think we just I'm not saying we've done anything wrong. I'm just saying, as those things have come before us, I think it's hard to say no when they meet the requirements for the added density, because they've done this and they've done that. But when you break it down and really ask the question, is it to the betterment of the city? Are we gaining? We're not necessarily gaining. And so I don't know, besides the bonus density approach, if there's any other way of getting at that. I do agree, allowing some flexibility, because there are those occasions where there is a benefit to the city, but I think it sways the other way far too often, so.
It's good to be cognizant of that, yes.
So the only thing I want to add is that we did receive an application for an open space planning and development. It's a Rachel Development Eberhard property.
Yeah.
So that came in a couple days ago, and obviously will be processed under the current code,
Right.
just so you know.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Yes, thank you.
Next, we have the Parks Master Plan, Bolton and Menk, that short little document we were blessed to read through. With a lot of great information.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. Again, just as described, back in October 23, we selected Bolton and Menk to prepare a new Parks Master Plan for the city of Lake Elmo. This document will help us guide staff's decisions as well as the Parks Commission for about the next 10 years. Part of this plan did consist of an advisory group where we met 4 times, as well as 2 additional pop-up meetings. These meetings helped us gather additional information to prepare this document that Bolton and Menk prepared for us. With that said, there are we did ask Bolton and Menk to provide the following informations in the Parks Master Plan, some musts and some additionals as well. So I'll take those into consideration as you review through this as well, so.
Got plenty of water for your voice for going through all this? Got plenty of water to keep your voice lubricated for all the talking you're gonna do?
Just filled up.
Good.
Thank you for asking. Hello, I'm Anna Springer, Senior Landscape Architect with Bolton and Menk. Thank you for your time this evening. I think you're all familiar with the work that we've done, and you had some time with the very short document as you described it. But I will go through our process, just kind of outline what we did as part of the system plan, and then talk about any changes you might like to see in the plan as we move towards adoption. Let me see if I can get this to go full screen here. There we go. So again, just gonna go over the purpose, the process, and then we'll have some time for discussion and feedback at the end. We had a 4-person team for the project. It was myself, us, and Josh Shields was the principal, and a public engagement specialist as well, who helped us with the pop-ups and the online survey. As Adam said, this plan aims to provide guidance for the development and direction of Lake Elmo's parks, open space, and trail system for the next 10 years. We started this process back in September, and we are here in June at this City Council workshop. So we broke the project into 4 tasks. The first task was project coordination and kickoff, where we were sort of information gathering and just getting ourselves set up for the process. And then we dove into inventory analysis, where we spent some time in your parks, on your trails, and also doing a lot of mapping and just understanding and listening through the advisory committee and the public engagement events. We developed some priority recommendations, and we shared those at a pop-up event and got some feedback, modified things, and came back with the final document, which we have reviewed with the advisory committee for the project, the Parks Commission, and now with you. One of the steps that we like to include is understanding the vision for the system and setting forth some guiding principles so that we know where we're going with the system, what do people want to see. And we try to tie that into the existing community vision. So we look at the vision from the 2040 plan and pull out key things from that to build on. So it should describe the future state of the system, and it should inspire and show what this looks like long-term. So with the help of the advisory committee, we came up with the statement that Lake Elmo's parks, trails, and open spaces should provide convenient access to a wide range of opportunities for all residents to recreate and connect. And the guiding principles that we developed were focused around connecting, growing, maintaining, and adapting. So connecting the community to each other, to the outdoors, to strengthen relationships. Grow is enhance and improve the existing assets as well as provide room for future growth of the park and trail system and healthy lifestyles for residents in the future. Maintain to provide guidance and recommendations that are implementable, maintainable, and sustainable. And with the idea that the plan is assisting the city to adapt to ever-changing trends and needs in parks and recreation, as well as the rapidly growing population of Lake Elmo. So we kind of start high level, you know, what does the system look like at a glance? Well, you have 24 city parks with 510 acres. You have 82 total miles of trail in the city, and it serves organized sports, casual play, hiking, relaxing, nature appreciation, all sorts of activities. You have ball fields, basketball courts, flex fields, pickleball courts, tennis courts, and volleyball courts.
So, we have a question?
Point of clarification, so if I recall this right, does that soccer football, that includes our contractual agreement with 834 for Oakland Fields? Is that where some of that is coming from?
It does not. This is just like open field space.
Okay.
Within the parks themselves. We look at demographic highlights, so, you know, who lives in Lake Elmo, who is this system being developed for? What's the education attainment in the community? What's the housing status? Other demographic highlights that tell us about people are that, you know, most people are driving to work alone. Only 3% of households are below the poverty level here. There's 17% of your households have one or more persons with a disability. And then we'll review the public engagement. So we had a booth set up at Light Up Lake Elmo at the library downtown. And a number of people came through and provided some feedback and had conversations with folks. It was a very successful event, I would say. I think we estimate probably almost 400 people probably passed through that space and interacted with the setup in some form or another. There was things that are geared towards children. They were voting on things with little balls. So maybe not the most scientific engagement, but it's fun for them to get them involved in thinking about what they want to see in their parks. But some of the top priorities that emerged were new and additional walking trails, multi-use courts, inclusive playgrounds, a dog park, which you're ticking off, and fitness or health stations. I'm not going to go over everything because I'm sure you all spent a lot of time with the document already, but the survey summary, we had 552 responses to the survey, which we were very pleased with. 86% of respondents believe that parks, trails, and open spaces are very important to the overall quality of life, and 88% were Lake Elmo respondents. So there were people that responded to the survey that were from Afton or Bayport or some of your neighboring communities. Most of the respondents had been living in Lake Elmo for at least 1 to 5 years. And if we look at age groups present in the respondents' households. We have a lot of children and middle-aged folks and people maybe on the cusp of retiring here too.
Easy.
Same thing.
People are visiting parks or using trails, half of them at least once a week, which is great. And one of the more popular parks is Sunfish Lake Park. So we also asked people about priorities. So some of the priorities that I've already mentioned, walking trails, multi-use courts, addition of seasonal use facilities, so things to do in the winter, and inclusive playgrounds. Just gonna kind of breeze through this. A lot of people like to walk to parks if they can. I think we were kind of curious, how does this survey response rate stack up to other projects that we've worked on or projects that we know about? So with that 4% response rate, that's in the higher end, I would say, from our experience. Like sometimes you're only getting 1.3% response on the surveys, so. So the bulk of the document, or some of the.
I'm sorry, could you scan back just for one quick second, the last slide?
Oh, scan back, I thought you said stand back. I was like,
No. To the one, oh, there,
Yeah,
right there,
this one.
there.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Okay. So parks are classified in a way that helps us kind of understand how to manage them, how people use them, how they should be distributed throughout the community. Neighborhood parks, community parks, regional parks, special use parks, natural resource protection areas, and community athletic parks. We here have identified how things were categorized in the current 2040 plan. So you can see we didn't have any special use parks in the 2040 plan, and there were no community athletic parks in the 2040 plan as well. So we just, we can't help ourselves. We like to map and see how things are distributed. So this map just shows what the current park classifications are and how they're distributed across the city. And then we'd like to do this park inventory table, which gives us a nice snapshot that shows us, the classifications, what all the amenities are, maybe where some of the gaps exist, or, you can look at this really quickly and say, oh, there's 2-3 city-owned sledding hills, okay? We've also included proposed classifications in this table, because we are recommending that you reclassify some of your parks, which will help kind of set the baseline for what goes into these parks and how they get managed moving forward. We also look at recreation facility service standards. So the National Recreation and Parks Association shares standards on a yearly basis, which kind of gives us a baseline for what the typical U.S. Park and Rec Association is offering. So aquatic centers, these are all broken down into per 10,000 people. So it looks like, if we're looking just at these benchmarks, you're missing one aquatic center, maybe missing an indoor ice rink. But I think it's important to keep local knowledge applied to these standards as well. So, you might not have an aquatic center, but you've got some nearby, and the community, I think you can ask yourselves, is the need of the community being met by these neighboring facilities? So things to take into consideration. I will say, we called out just a couple of the deficits, basketball, half-court, deficit of 2 half-courts. But maybe, the trends in this community is that people aren't playing basketball as much, so that's okay if we don't meet that benchmark. Have quite a number of multi-use fields, currently meeting the need for pickleball and playgrounds. We look at agency benchmarks, which is more on the operations and maintenance side of things, where it's broken down into all US Park and Rec agencies. And then we also get a little bit more granular information, looking at cities that are 20,000 in population or less. But some of these numbers are pretty interesting, like, you know, you have a lot of you have high park acreage. The average has like 1,100 residents per park, and you have 573 residents per park. That's pretty good. Acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. You're high in acreage per 1,000 residents as well. We did split the trails, local miles versus what's in the county park or are considered regional trails. So you have 49 local trail miles.
So
which is
beyond,
great.
Anna, beyond the Lake Elmo Park Reserve, are there other county trails?
There's regional trails, the Gateway Trail
The
that
Gateway-
crosses through the corner.
Oh, just that little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's another regional trail that goes up into the park reserve.
Okay, all right. Along Keats, that's considered regional
I believe so,
from 94 north?
yeah.
Okay.
When we get into the budget numbers, that's telling a story as well. Your annual operating expenditures, the typical agency spends 1.4 on annual operating expenses, and you all are at 431. Annual operating expenditures per resident, 135 for the typical median agency, and you're at just under 32. So this, you know, again, it's one piece of the puzzle, one snippet of information, but it does kind of help, I think, always to compare yourself to what other agencies are doing around the country and locally. Then when we also like to do gap analysis, so we'll map things and overlay it with the land use. We did this to look at just general park access. So, you know, there's this pink, lighter pink buffer is a half a mile, and the darker pink is a quarter mile. So that's generally what we would consider walkable distances. So most of the residential areas are covered. You have good access to a park. But I would say there's a bit of a gap down here in the southeast corner, especially as you start to develop a little bit more in these areas. We also mapped playgrounds. We didn't map some of the privately owned playgrounds or school facilities, just with the understanding that it's not under the city's direct influence or control what happens in these properties. But you can see, again, there's maybe less access here in the southeast corner. Existing natural areas, right now, current classification, there's just a couple of places to go to for natural area access. And then we look at court distribution. Where are the specific courts located across the city? You know, again, we can see this gap in the southeast portion of Lake Elmo. The same goes for, what is this? Ball fields. We've got pretty good distribution across the city, but no ball fields down here. Then we looked at the trails, so mapping current trails. So that includes local trails, snowmobile trails, unpaved trails. And also we know that there's future planning efforts with you and other entities, so we like to show those as well. County trails, regional trails. And then we can pull out some kind of key findings from that needs assessment. I would say, you know, your your trail miles are good, the connectivity is maybe lacking. You know, just getting from north to south, east to west is a little challenging across the city, but you do have a lot of nice, you know, sort of pockets of trails that different neighborhoods have access to. But the community is looking for that greater connectivity. Additional upgraded baseball facilities are desired for competitive gameplay. More access to winter recreation. We heard a lot about plowing trails so that folks can use trails in the winter. Park acreage is good, distribution is generally good. Again, that connectivity piece, getting to parks can be challenging, and updating of play equipment would improve user experience. So we take all of what we heard and develop a set of recommendations, and this presentation just has a snippet of some of the recommendations. We lay them out as goals, you know, broader general statements, and then the policies, which is the general way that you would achieve these things, and then initiatives are more specific actions. So just kind of breaking down the park recommendations into access. You know, this talks about working to fill the access gap in the southeast and north central area of the city when development occurs. Plan for future park integration by adding parks as the community grows. Requiring the dedication of parkland in strategic locations that align with the long-term goals for park size, access, and amenities. I'm not gonna read through all of these, but we are proposing a number of parks be reclassified, specifically looking at more natural areas and managing those more as natural areas, and just adding signs so that people know that they are public and they could potentially have winter trail, you know, unpaved surfaces, and just some things that would support more passive park use in the natural areas. We get into facility recommendations. We're looking at adding a special facility to meet the needs of tweens, teens, and young adults. It's something that you're not alone in lacking facilities for that group. Some communities have implemented challenge courses or ninja skills courses, skate parks, or disc golf course, I think could all be facilities that would serve that kind of underserved group at the moment. Looking at places for larger group gatherings, developing a reservable shelter with potable water, electrical, and permanent restrooms could support larger community gatherings. Incorporating inclusive play features when you're redeveloping your play equipment, just to serve that part of the population as well, maybe the less able-bodied. And then when we get into connectivity recommendations, we've got a couple of search corridors. You know, is there a way that we could connect folks from this gateway trail and get them to the regional park eventually? So we just, you know, we recognize that this is a challenging spot, but if we don't put the line on the map, we'll probably never start looking for a connection there, so this is one way to start doing that. And then there's low-hanging, well, what we think is more low-hanging fruit, which would be called out in these, with these specific boxes here, so.
What's the dark dashed line?
The dark black.
Yeah.
It is labeled as recommended connectivity improvements.
Okay.
And more specific open space recommendations. There's some content in there about addressing invasive species. We heard quite a few people talk about managing emerald ash borer and just the need to really stay on top of that and be a little more proactive on that side of things in the preserves and the parks.
what's that say under 531? Encourage volunteer
Efforts.
efforts.
Oh, it looks like a export error there. Make sure that we get that taken care of.
Makes sense.
And then we get into the implementation chapter, which is about setting priorities and giving some high-level planning figures for what it might take to implement some of these recommendations. Both the advisory committee and the Parks Commission thought it was this first step of hiring a parks director is kind of the key step to improving the system overall, that adding that capacity would allow for more time to be spent to pursue some of the grant money and the funding mechanisms that are needed to implement some of these recommendations.
Let me ask you a question, Anna, because you deal with a lot of other communities, and things like this pop up on my radar as, you know, as Lake Elmo has grown since I moved here, like 6,600 people, and there's certain things you can do, and as you gain in population and ability to do things, it's I'm always questioning myself, so when is the right time to do something like a parks director? And you tend to look at other communities that say, well, we've got this going on, it makes sense for us to now include that in our staffing plan as we go forward. Is there any kind of, I mean, you showed some of the other communities and what we spend relative to those, and that makes sense. Just curious if there's anything kind of says, well, yeah, you're at that part, and cities of your size typically have a position like this to cover that, and that's, you know, that's what we spend on this, to make those amenities beneficial to your residents. Is there any kind of guidance on something like that?
Just like when you hit that inflection point?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything hard and fast. I mean, I think for me, or like what makes it obvious to me for Lake Elmo is that sometimes there might not be a parks director, but there's a program coordinator, somebody that's, you know, planning activities in the parks and working with volunteer groups and just doing a whole set of things that, you know, somebody who's also doing 2 other jobs just aren't gonna be able to do.
Right.
I have not worked in a community that didn't have a parks director, so it was new territory for me.
Got it.
I'll be honest. But also just like when you see kind of where your population is too, you have a lot of young kids in the community and younger parents, and I think they're just kind of clamoring for a little bit more programming in the community, which
Sure.
is something that a parks director would have a lot to do with.
I was just going to remember her.
Just to maybe get some clarity on that too, because I think there was a slide on here where you showed some of the other community sizes, or when you mentioned the other communities you worked with that had the parks directors, is that the communities you're referencing?
The ones that I've listed up here?
Yeah,
The survey size ones.
the survey size one, yes, thank you. 'Cause maybe that'll,
So, let's see.
did you go past?
You went past it
Right there.
there.
So these are the ones you're referencing that you've worked with that all had parks directors?
Some of these, I didn't work on Wabasha or Blue Earth, but Oss worked on Blue Earth. So I can't say for sure that they had specific park directors.
Okay.
But Chanhassen, for sure. Otsego, yes. Little Canada, yes. Maple Grove, yes. They all had parks directors.
See, and that's where I'm looking at Otsego, Little Canada, Chanhassen's about 10,000 more than us, and obviously Maple Grove and Elk River larger than we are, but the other two are kind of in that ballpark arena.
Yeah.
Councilmember Holtz.
With that topic of the director, based upon the information you're gathering and what you've been able to see so far, would your thought be that there are already then positions that exist that would be shifted under that? Or are you thinking that it would be a Parks Director and then additional new FTEs under that? Or is it more so maybe a reorganization of people and what they're already doing and maybe changing who they're answering to?
We didn't go that far. We
Okay.
didn't aim to get into the organizational structure, you know, if there's certain tasks that someone's doing now that would be shifted over to that job description. I would imagine that there would be things that would get shifted over, but that person would also have capacity to start doing some of the other things that we're showing in the plan.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
I would just caution us on jumping on just adding a position without understanding, I mean, each of these cities has their own unique structure. They may or may not have a public works director and an assistant director. They may not have a community development director. So I would just want us to be cautious about jumping on, we would need to create a position for a parks director. Because I might ask Adam just, you know, how much of his time is spent with parks. I know you do a lot with parks, and so I think it's great to recommend it and put it in there, but again, I think there's a whole lot of other information in here that I'd rather get to than get
Yeah,
stuck
it
on
was
a
just
position.
it certainly would have to
Yeah.
be discussed. It was just a question I had
Yeah.
relative to that, and I'm certainly not by any means recommending that that's something we do off of this parks plan right away. But thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Dragisich.
Yeah, I think, a very interesting report. I read, had a good time looking through it. In terms of, you know, whether we have a park director or not, you know, my first glance, I kind of look back historically over City of Lake Elmo's in their financial report, they have 10 years of history, and the city's gained a significant amount of population. We really haven't changed our number of staff hardly at all. And if we look at a park director, I'm not, at this point, know enough, but you'd want to go back and I think the first step would be identify comparable cities and what makes them comparable to us. Age, demographics, you know, population size, all those kinds of things, right? And say, so as they grew, when did they add a parks director? Which ones have and which ones don't? And how are they structured in their operations if they don't have a parks director? How do they manage their parks? Is there, you know, the assistant public works director whose primary responsibility is parking? So I think there's some investigation that we could do. My sense is we'll find out as we look that, you know, staffing is going to be a more pressing issue given our growth. But looking at how other people have addressed it gives you a good guideline at any rate.
Just follow up.
Yes.
So I think one thing that might be helpful to go back and look at is we've done operational audits over the past couple of years. And so I thought we did one for Public Works, but maybe we didn't. And I know we did for planning, and so I guess I would go back to those operational audits that were done where there were recommendations for positions.
For sure.
Yeah, and it may be buried in there somewhere, so it might be just resurrecting some of that, so.
Good discussion.
Can I probe on some of the recommendations?
Sure. Well, let's,
Or are you, oh, you still have more?
I don't think she's done, so we kind of jumped
Where were
in,
we?
but
I think this is leading to a great discussion, so we can.
don't want
keep
to shut your
Going with
your time
this.
short.
No, I was just going to, you know, kind of highlight, or just show at very minimum, kind of how the implementation table is laid out with the priority levels of low, medium, and high, and what that means for a time frame. So a high priority would be within the next 1 to 3 years, medium 4 to 7, and
Low.
low priority level would be 8 years and beyond. So we can open it up to questions with that.
Well, I guess, sorry, I just wrote down a bunch of the three numbers. 3.1, and I guess this might be a question for staff. So that all of 3 is about connectivity. trying to fill the gaps, make sure that the recommendation of 10 to 15-minute walk is available for everyone. Rough guesstimate, based upon what's already in our CIP, how much work is this recommending that's not in our CIP? Like, does our CIP call out maybe a third of what we're looking at, half of what we're looking at, or is it not even a drop in the bucket for how much connectivity is really being looked into here?
It's geared right towards trails.
Yeah.
Probably not as much as, development kind of strengthens the trail system, right? So if we're trying to mix those gaps, we probably don't have a lot in there right now.
And I noticed some of the, at least on the map, like connectivity was recommended along Lake Elmo Ave and along Manning. And, I mean, those are county roads. I mean,
Yeah. So
those aren't
are-
happening anytime soon.
Those are great opportunities to start tracking with the county right
Yep.
now, and just, I'm sure you are doing that, but, again, putting lines on the map is important, but it's definitely key to get those conversations going and try to work with the county early to get some of your needs met, address some, difficult crossings, or, if there's opportunities to get some grade separated crossings of some of the higher traffic roads, it's better to start chipping away at those as soon as possible.
Understandable. With 2.3.2, that was inclusive parks, and I fully understand, I fully agree with that. Was the thought process maybe like one inclusive park overall within the city? Was it maybe add inclusivity to parks across? Like maybe a playground might have partial inclusivity access, but it's not necessarily, your master, or is it more so probably a more centralized singular one?
I think it would be good to have a centralized, singular park that's universal, so it doesn't have just parts of it that are designed to be accessible by all, it's completely accessible to all. But in all of the parks, I think there should be at least one accessible feature, so that, every park has something for everybody.
Gotcha.
And that's, that can happen over time as parks are updated.
On 1.5, there was mention of, so reclassifying VFW Park from neighborhood to athletic park and support competitive and town ball play there. I'm just wondering, what does that look like? Because it didn't involve expanding the field.
Yeah,
Town ball can't be played on that field.
right. We'll take that off so that it just says competitive, but it's just like working with your baseball associations to understand their needs and how can you support competitive play there, so it might be looking at improving dugouts. I think the parking there could use some reorganization. There's not a lot of room to do much, like in terms of reorganizing, but is the full plan on this computer somewhere so I can see the recommendation? No.
And I guess just the last one was 1.3.3 was discussing of, other opportunities in downtown to develop a special use or a mini park, or maybe private development to create open space. A mini park, what are we thinking? Is that like a common space? Is that a place with a fountain where people gather, or what's a mini park?
A mini park is, we went back and forth with the advisory committee too about this language a little bit. We initially had pocket park in the plan, which in my mind is just, it's like a park that's less than an acre in size, and it's just designed to serve one function. And usually in the case of like a downtown mini park, it would just be like plaza space for people to gather, maybe eat an ice cream cone or drink their
Have some
coffee.
seating or something like
Yeah,
that in there.
seating and maybe some nice plantings.
Mhm.
Just another place to fill in and let people gather.
Gotcha. I used up my time. Thank you.
Councilmember Baxter?
So I just want to take a step back on one of the items Councilmember Holtz referenced, and my document is so big it won't load the page for me to reference. So I think it was 1.5, the baseball section. Does that sound about right?
There,
So my question is, as I read through the report, and I did read the whole thing, and great work, by the way. This is fabulous information. That's really going to help us. But I was curious about how we came to a point of making a recommendation we needed baseball fields. When I look at the data, we have adequate competitive fields according to the standards, and we actually have excess of recreational fields. And our multi-use fields, we're also, like, we have an excess of 7 of those fields. And so I was just curious, where did that recommendation come from? What's supporting that one?
Well, I should back up and say that those, the benchmarks that have the quantity don't say anything about quality. So a lot of the ball fields that are in some of the neighborhood parks, they're not up to competitive standards. They might not have bases, they might just be like a little bit of crushed egg with a backstop. And they're really designed for more informal play, so kids going out and just doing a pickup game. But there was, we were given a survey from a couple of years ago, I think it was 2022, there was a baseball survey that just said.
With
that there's
30
a
people?
lack of- What's that?
With 30 respondents?
Is that, I didn't look at how many
It
people.
was, it was a low,
responded.
low
It was-
turnout on
It was
the
a
survey.
flawed survey,
Oh, okay.
so it shouldn't have been used. So I'm curious, so it was survey data that was primarily the driver of the baseball field recommendation, is that?
That was part of it. I think we heard that at the Light Up Lake Elmo event too, a lot about baseball.
I didn't see that in the screenshots. I looked at all those because I was curious if it was coming up anywhere but a survey. And I didn't see that any of the dots in those pictures depicted anything related to baseball. And so I'm wondering with the bigger survey that was done, which we had the 4% response on, did you look at those results and evaluate against any bias in the results by chance?
We did include the full survey responses in
Yeah.
the appendix. I did read most of the responses.
I wonder if I
Yeah,
could
I
just
guess-
point out a couple of things with that survey that might raise maybe a red flag on a potential bias in the results.
Okay.
So there were just over 500 and some respondents. When we look at the breakdown of Lake Elmo versus non-Lake Elmo, there are 65 respondents who are not in Lake Elmo, which is fine. And when I looked at the detailed results, and it looked like with question 18 was where really baseball seemed to come up in the other comments a lot, because it wasn't an option to select in any of the survey questions. And as I looked closer at the data and the responses, what was interesting is from the beginning of the survey in November until the 7th of January, there were a total of 54 write-in comments for other, and 2 of those were related to baseball. And then from January 8th until the 24th of January, there were 103 write-in responses for other, and 52 of those were related to baseball, so 50% of the write-ins after the 8th. And what you might find interesting is that Lake Elmo Baseball posted a Facebook message on January 8th to all their members to complete the survey and tell Lake Elmo City how important recreation, or how important baseball fields are. Which to me, as I look at the data, it's very clear. And as I go back to the non-Lake Elmo respondents of the 65, 55 completed the survey after January 8th. So 55 out of the 65 non-Lake Elmo residents. Again, the bulk of the baseball comments came after the post. And so I certainly hope we're not using survey results that appear to me to be biased in determining that we need baseball fields. Nor that two of the members on the advisory committee are actually board members for the Lake Elmo Baseball Association.
Okay.
Well, that's all well pointed out. The one thing I'll say, it's not just about baseball fields in 1.5. It talks about meeting the needs of recreational league and tournament play baseball.
What does that equal?
Well, that just means that a lot of our recreational ball fields, like she was indicating, they're more like recreational, that have the crushed sandstone. If you're gonna have any sort of like softball leagues or baseball leagues or tournament play, those don't really serve the needs. So I guess that's where I would read that a little differently than just a normal baseball field.
I would upgrade the fields. And again, I'm looking for the data that says that we have a problem. There's reference to capacity, but is that capacity concern coming from Lake Elmo baseball versus a capacity in our broader community?
I mean, it's not atypical that a specific association would, voice loudly over concerns for their
Right.
sport,
I think
but.
that's my feeling on this is, I guess, like, what's the point of doing any surveys if we're gonna question the results of any survey? I mean, that's gonna be part of any survey, and I guess I get what you're saying with it, and
There's bias.
that does appear that way, but at the same time, it's like, well, so are we gonna just look at this again and say, all right, we're not gonna use the survey again like we did with the previous one?
Not at all. I don't think that should be driving what we're doing with baseball fields. I'd like to see the other data that says that we have a problem and we need to fix it by spending a few $1 million on a baseball sports complex, because I was looking for that specifically as we're going out and looking at land. Part of the reason we really wanted to do this park master plan was to hear from the community to understand what they really want. And so if we go and purchase land, what do they really want? And so to make recommendations based on one association, I'm curious if, one of the things early on in this that I was worried about going into this is how are we engaging other associations? And so as part of the engagement process, did we reach out to any soccer leagues or Stillwater baseball or any lacrosse groups or flag football? I mean, I know that was something that as a council we talked about when we looked at potential groups to hire to do this, that the community engagement part was really important, and making sure we had, feedback from those other sports leagues was also very important. And so are you able to speak to any of that engagement that was done?
We did not directly engage with any other organizations. It was all done through the pop-ups, the online survey. We didn't hold any specific listening sessions with any association or group.
Were any of the members on the advisory committee connected to any other sports besides Lake Elmo baseball?
We didn't talk about affiliations, I guess, as a group. But.
So that would be my concern with, I mean, there's a lot in this report, and it's fantastic. But that's millions of dollars that are being recommended for something that I guess is not supported by the report. And I certainly hope it's not in there because there's one group driving that.
Yeah. And I would say, if you're looking at adding a community athletic facility or a park that's just dedicated towards a certain sport, that should be something that's supported by the community. Because you're right, it's a big outlay of cash.
Thank you.
All right, if there's any more questions, otherwise we're a little behind time. Want to thank Bolton and Menk for presenting this. I want to thank all the members of your committee. Certainly did appreciate the pop-up events. Did walk into the one during the Light Up Lake Elmo, which was great to see everybody in there and, kids putting what was important. And I heard one dad saying, well, you've only got 5 dots. You got to figure out what's most important to you, right? So you can put them all in one, or you can spread them out. You just, however you want to do that. So it's good to see getting younger people involved and and their parents involving them in it, which I kind of like to see. I don't know, is this, on this, this has already been presented to the Parks Commission?
Yes.
Okay, so then the next thing would be to, if there's any flushing out of this, which I didn't really see anything that I would tend to make any changes on, it would come to council for adoption, right?
Yep.
I'd like some data on the baseball side of it.
If there's some data available, if you can provide any data for Councilmember Beckstrom on the baseball side of it, that would be appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next item would be community room rental.
And now for something truly important. I need you to focus intensely on this issue. So we basically are here, we have a room outside this city council chambers that says community room. And the mayor had brought up that we should either use it for the community or change the name. And so we basically came to a previous workshop, and I got feedback from council and mayor concerning what did they like to see in it, and I took that feedback in addition to 30 pages of other city information that you could certainly read. So there's a whole gamut of cities, sometimes only doing it during the day, sometimes they charge a significant amount of money. It's a profit center for some cities use it as a community good. It's owned by the taxpayers, it's utilized by the taxpayers. And so this is my interpretation of what I'm hearing from the council concerning this. So we basically would use the community room or the 3,800 old council chambers, as we call them. And I'm recommending that we don't charge for them. I'm recommending that we utilize it for the groups which we've, it's for the benefit of Lake Elmo. We're not looking to have outside cities and stuff like that. I would recommend it not be utilized for firms, commercial activities, religious groups, individual organizations that are for-profit in nature, the selling of goods or services, or for private celebrations or parties. And that's kind of what I kind of heard the people say, council say last time. We have some general, people can request. We have a form in here. We would have it available between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. We basically would buy one of those at the airport. You got the traffic control things or where people guided. What are they called?
Lights. Stanchions.
Stanchions, thank you. So we basically put that in front of the doors here, because we can't close these doors off. This is your storm shelter. And so if they happen to be in a meeting, there happen to be a thunderstorm, this is where everybody would come. So we can't lock these doors. And so we basically would just use, hopefully the goodwill of people, stop, don't go, whatever, something like that. They have access to the bathrooms, and the rest of the building is locked off. At the end of the meetings, they would have to haul their trash out, and they would have to clean the room, return the room to the condition that they found it in, and then drop their key inside the lockbox. If they're utilizing the old city hall, they can just drop it in the outside lockbox. And so, we have food or drinks could be brought in, but no alcohol. We wouldn't provide any coffee makers, cups, dishes, stuff like that. They would pretty much have to haul it in. And individuals would be held liable for any damages should anything occur as a result of their use. So this is where our contact form would have the individuals that they're signing off, and they agree to be personally responsible or group organization if they, rip the TV off the wall or something like that, so. And I have the third page, I have rental policy. So applicants gotta be 18 years old and no alcohol, tobacco, THC, no animals except trained. So it goes through there, then you have the rental room form. So as a workshop, we're looking for further feedback from council that we can bring back to a meeting for approval, and in turn we can start letting the citizens utilize this room.
Councilmember Beckstrom.
Just a question. So I know when we talked about this before, we talked about no private parties, but I wonder, I got to thinking about that a little bit and looking at some of the other city policies, some cities do. And with it being graduation season, I was thinking about that. I've gone to a couple of graduations where they've held them in, facilities like, our community room. And so, I didn't know if we needed to revisit that piece of it at all. I don't know how big of a deal that is, but that was just one thing I caught in there.
I know at Baytown Township, we used to rent it for individual parties, family reunions and all that stuff. And it ended up just being more problematic than it was worth. And we ended up with more cleaning costs because we ended up with cake. We ended up with all sorts of different things on the floor. And then you have to chase after the people to say, okay, you gotta pay $200 for carpet cleaning now, and then they gotta pay, and trying to simplify it a little bit to kind of keep it as needed, the HOAs, Boy Scouts, knitting clubs, kind of a little bit more casual versus parties.
And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I just picked that up in a couple of other
Yeah.
ones.
Councilmember Holtz.
I know on the request form, it asks for how many people would attend. Do we need to say in the rental policy what the max capacity is for either room?
Yeah, we probably should. I don't know what that is. I'm sure it's either posted on the door or the fire department knows.
Yeah, there should be a fire code for that, right?
Yep.
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 Yeah, we'll put that on the form.
We might know someone.
Yeah, it's probably somebody. I like that it's simple. Add the capacity thing, and for me, that's giving the opportunity for people to use it for what it was intended for. I like it. I like that, it should be fairly easy to implement, right? Should not take us, you don't have to deal with credit cards or payment or any of that jazz.
Yeah, I talked to a couple cities where the city clerks were involved with this, and they were just like, they canceled, then you gotta get the money back.
Yeah.
And, you gotta do a cleaning fee, you only get part of it. We're gonna argue about this, and
Yeah, no,
it's just not worth it. I mean,
Yeah.
the only staff time, so they basically would use Rebecca as our reservation person. And she might have to deal with people walking through, let's say it's an HOA and they wanna do the presentation on the TV. They might come in early and want 5 minutes to do
Yeah.
that during the day, during the work hours, so they can get that nailed down.
sure.
And the only other thing we'll probably have to address, or we'll do this at the staff level, which is, so let's say I have a meeting at 7 o'clock, there's no one here, who do they call if the key card doesn't work? We're gonna have to figure that out at a staff level, do they call Nicole up in Wyoming? Probably not, where do you live, Adam?
Other side in Richmond.
Oh, well, okay, so, I think you live in Lake Elmo. Stillwater, well, anyway, yeah, but those are the things we'll have to figure out, cause, so we can't rely on the fire department to be available to call to say, hey, the key card doesn't work, can you let me in? They may be here, they may not be here, so we'll figure that out at the
I
staff
think
level.
Matt's the closest.
I was just thinking that.
The
I'm
mayor
looking
lives
at
in,
5 people right here that live in Lake
the
Elmo.
mayor lives in Lake Elmo, coincidence.
I'm probably one of the furthest away.
But the train might get in my way, True.
He'd be late.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out.
No, I thank you for putting that together and checking other communities and doing that. Yes, Councilmember Dragisich.
Yeah, I thought it was a well thought out policy, and thank you for doing that. It seemed to cover all the bases. I guess I did think about the room capacity. In terms of, the party thing, I agreed with not doing that, but maybe for a different reason. I always get sensitive that your local businesses go after you and say, well, you're competing with us now. We're taxpayers, and that party could be at my business.
Yeah.
And that's why I've always kind of leaned against that, because it's hard to justify.
Sure. Great.
So one
Yes.
last question. So there was just one other thing that I noticed in some of the other policies, and I don't know if it makes sense, given the scope of ours, but the priority of who can schedule, I thought that might be nice to spell out. If there's competing needs, where you've got non-Lake Elmo residents as the last priority, so,
Yeah, I think we have everything subordinate to you and us, you know, but, I was thinking just first come, first serve. I mean, she's gonna have a calendar, just
Yeah.
like we have an Outlook calendar. You schedule it for 7 o'clock and
If it gets
Matt
booked,
wants
it
to
gets
order
booked.
same day, well, it's too late.
Well, I wouldn't want non-Lake Elmo resident, or non-Lake Elmo groups reserving our community room if there's Lake Elmo residents that would want
Yeah.
it. That would be the only thing.
Okay.
But I don't know if it makes sense enough to even build it into the policy. Maybe that's just something we keep a
Okay.
track of.
No, it's, yeah, and this will be a document, it's a living document. Staff will see if we go forward, how is it working? Is the room being trashed? Are we keeping care of it? Can we expand the use? So this is something I fully expect that the staff will change,
Yeah.
you know, as we get experience in this.
Yeah, if it gets abused and not used properly, then, you know, unfortunately, sometimes the greater lose out because of a poor few, but, I mean, they need to be cognizant of that.
We always used to have this expression, we just can't have nice things anymore.
Right.
That's my motto.
Okay. Items for future work session agenda would be land use training, village area study, city debt level, tax rate, and street project policy. All on the next one. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and we will adjourn at 8:34.